Welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia. My name is Jason Freeman, and it is my pleasure to introduce tonight's authors, Christine Pride and Joe Piazza. Publishing industry veteran Christine Pride has held a variety of editorial positions at Doubleday, Simon & Schuster, Crown, among other publishing companies. In this capacity, she has championed and edited numerous New York Times bestselling memoirs and inspirational stories. Also a freelance editorial consultant, teacher, and coach, Pride writes the Race Matters column for the popular blog Cup of Joe, which brings us to our other author. A journalist, editor, and podcast host, Joe Piazza is also the author of 7 novels, including Charlotte Walsh Likes to Win, If Nuns Ruled the World, and Fitness Junkie. Her writing has been published in a wide variety of places, including the Wall Street Journal, Marie Claire, and Slate. She formerly served as a managing editor for Yahoo Travel, the executive news director for the print and digital editions of In Touch Weekly, and she was the senior digital editor at Current TV. Pride and Piazza's first collaborative novel, and a Good Morning America book club pick, We Are Not Like Them, told the dual perspective story of 2 lifelong friends, one black and one white, whose bond is forever changed when the latter's police officer husband is involved in the shooting of an unarmed black teenager. Tonight, they join us with their follow-up novel, You Were Always Mine. In it, a black woman finds an abandoned white baby, setting up collisions with her own past and the child's mother. The great Jodi Picoult says of this novel, the work of Joe Piazza and Christine Pride sits squarely at the tender intersection of race, class, and ethics, wrapped in beautiful prose and a killer plot that keeps you turning the pages. And she also says this novel will spark one of many conversations America should be having. Tonight's conversation will be sparked by Alexandra Auder. She is a writer and actor and the author of Don't Call Me Home, a memoir. She was born in New York City to Mother Viva, a Warhol superstar, and Father Michael, an award-winning filmmaker who directed Chelsea Girls with Andy Warhol. She's also a featured character in HBO's High Maintenance and has acted in the films of Wim Wenders and Jodie Foster, among others. So Philadelphia, let's give a warm greeting for tonight's guests.
Hello.
My friend Leslie just showed she did her nails for the book.
Oh, yes. I love it.
Gorgeous. And matching colors. I mean, of your outfit, too.
And the outfit, too. I know, I love it. I love everything about it.
Hi. I guess I'm used to being the other person. I'm like, okay, yeah, talk to me.
You're like,
I actually did sort of forget. I was
we could do that too. We've been talking to each other nonstop for 5 days now. We're like, does someone else want to talk?
I've got my notes. Thanks for coming, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here. I was just saying back there, it's so exciting to be in the the green room back there.
I know.
I've only been the audience.
You feel fancy. They have like all these pictures of every famous author of all time.
Yeah, it's nice back there.
And then we're like, we're here.
All right, so ladies, I think I can call you ladies.
Definitely.
Yes, absolutely.
Great.
Absolutely.
You're the co-authors extraordinaire, and I read both your books back to back.
Oh, that's interesting. I don't know if anyone else has read them back to back.
Yeah, it was really interesting. Yeah, and cool, and obviously a lot of braided themes in there.
Definitely.
And so I think the most obvious, which I'm going to get over the most obvious because I feel like in your first book, you touched on the theme of sort of hiding the self and secrecy.
Definitely.
And the first book is, to me, more clearly, but I could be wrong, the craft of it was like, okay, that seems obvious to me. So the first book is alternating chapters, Riley and Jen. And Jen is a white woman and Riley is a black woman. And they're best friends, and I won't give away anything else. But I imagined, obviously, you wrote Jen and you wrote Riley.
People do.
Yeah.
People do.
Yeah. It's a common assumption.
Yes, I'm going to assume that.
Yeah.
And in the new book, the wonderful new book, it's really from the point of view of Cinnamon, a black woman. And so I have a 2-part question. You each wrote your own chapters, assuming correctly in the first book. Did you edit each other's chapters in the first book? In this book, how did you work that? Because the POV is Cinnamon, besides for Daisy, who's a white. There's one other POV, letters from Daisy, who is a white teenager.
Yes, yes.
So we actually did not split the
alternate
writing in the first book.
We did not.
Yeah.
No. But I think I love to unpack that assumption, right?
Yeah,
that
please.
It would be easier for Christine to write the black character and easier for me to write the white character. And our take on it was that race is a huge part of both of our characters' lives, but not every part. So both Jen, our white character, and Riley, our black character, they obviously are of a certain race, but they're also friends and sisters and daughters and career women and wives, and we could both speak to those things, and we felt like we would be doing the characters a real disservice if we didn't both contribute to them. And when we first started writing We Are Not Like Them, Christine was working full-time as an editor at Simon & Schuster, but she was my editor at Simon & Schuster, and then pulled me away to start writing books with her.
Which is so cool and rare, I think.
It is.
From the little I know of
is.
the publishing industry.
Yeah, it is pretty rare.
And so she was working full-time, and I was working full-time making podcasts and just having babies nonstop. So with our outline, we were like, okay, who has time to write a chapter? We couldn't tell if it was Riley's chapter or Jen's chapter, and then we trade back and forth, back and forth and over. We work in Google Docs.
Okay.
And so she would start editing, and then we'd send comments back and forth to each other. I don't think there's a sentence in either book that we didn't both touch at some point.
And we also really wanted the book to feel, particularly for the first book, that is alternating chapters. So it's a very she said, kind of structure on purpose. But we wanted the book itself to feel coherent. We did not want it to feel like two different people wrote it, even though both their names are on the jacket. But we didn't want it to feel so disjointed in terms of like writing styles. We wanted the characters to be fully embodied so that we actually, disappeared behind them as writers, and they were just the voices. And so that involved both of us being involved in both characters. But having said that, we chose to write this book together for a reason, and that is because we could bring our different experiences and perspectives to the table that are very different as a black woman and a white woman. This is for the first book, but also holds true for the second too. And so the parts that did need to, have our personal touches and our personal experiences thrown in, we were able to do that as well, because we always say that, there are conversations that I, as a black woman, hear that Joe would never hear, right? In all black spaces, and vice versa. And so the beauty of writing together was we could bring those conversations in. And that happens with our second book too, even though it's not exactly as 50-50 in terms of POV. Cinnamon really does own the story. She's the black woman with, as Alex said, there's some letters mixed in, but still we made it coherent and then brought in, our different perspectives when it was warranted or when we had something specific to add.
Well, there's a fun connection with Cinnamon's name in Philadelphia. Should we tell that story?
The local Philadelphia connection.
The local Philadelphia
for sure.
connection, yeah. So for We Are Not Like Them, it involves a police shooting of a black teenager. And for that book, we did a lot of reporting with the Philadelphia police. And one of the officers that we were interviewing was telling us this story about it was her first partner, I think.
I thought it was a CI. That's so funny. This is so many years ago.
Oh, I thought it was her first partner. I don't know. She was telling us the story, and she was like, and her name was Cinnamon. And we're like, we are obsessed with that name. And we're like, let's just file that away, and we'll use it in something. And then
we had this. We had already had the idea for this second book, and we sold both books actually at the same time. And so the premise we knew we were going to do, but we hadn't named the character yet. And so, it's like characters' names are so hard, right? Hard. It's like
I was thinking a lot about
really
that.
Hard.
Yeah, I was wondering if you both would argue about characters' names or something, and actually, and then you say how, Cinnamon got her name, which is interesting to bring to the next subject, because so much taking off on that theme of secrecy and like fear of intimacy and shame of your past, which is, I think, a big theme of
the book.
Yeah. And so Cinnamon is living in some ways with her husband, Jason. I'm going to say living a lie, but she's not really, because there is really love there and they have a real thing, but she's not even shared with her own husband the traumas of her past, and her name comes up in that. So she got her, I think, her mother lost a bet with a stripper, or was it? Am I correct with that? Yeah. And so you kind of learn that, you get little clues along the way of what Cinnamon's past was, how she became who she was, and I wonder if you two, did you ever have to fight for things that each of you wanted within even within Daisy's life, within Jason's life, within Cinnamon's life, that one of you felt certain about and the other of you didn't, and vice versa?
Yeah, I mean, less so in this book than I think even the last book. I think our collaborative, I mean, it's interesting because this question dovetails in terms of our both storytelling and our collaboration dynamic, right? And so I think in this book, there's much more of, if you can make a case for this, like it's just about the story. So we don't really disagree so much as it is like...
Tell me why you want this.
Yeah, tell me why you want this.
Yeah.
Like, tell me why this is important. And like, oh yeah, that makes sense. That it, makes sense in terms of for the sake of the story. And so that is how we've... resolved makes it sound like it's coming on for the other side of conflict, but that's how we, sort of manage the big decisions in the book. But I think, it's interesting that one of the things we had, I guess, a discussion about was, and this is not giving too much away. We're really going to try to like not do any spoilers.
Guys, I'm so bad with spoilers.
I know she really is.
Christine's
She's
like,
and then in the end,
I don't know. No. I'm just like on page 134.
So I'll elbow her if she's getting close. But our character Daisy, who's 19 years old and finds herself, unexpectedly pregnant, and it is obviously a very harrowing and dramatic situation for her to find herself in. But in delving with her backstory, she has big dreams for herself. And so early on in the book, we were trying to decide, what these dreams would be. And she comes, from a very, small rural town in the South. Joe was like, she wants to be a pilot. From
the very
beginning.
I was really interested in that.
I was like, I want her to be a pilot.
Yeah, and I was like, is this too much? Does she want to be a pilot? Does this feel... And it's interesting in even thinking about like that kind of thought process. I had to interrogate, sort of my own biases there, right? Like, why shouldn't she want to be a pilot, right? Like, everybody is allowed to have whatever dreams they want to have from wherever, vantage point they're starting from. And so, it was like, why not that? But I think it's interesting to think about, even we had the power to create our characters' dreams. Like, that's a lot of power. And, why did I feel initially like limited in that, right? Like that is something to think about in and of itself.
That's a really good scene in the book too. I thought I was imagining both of you. Actually, that's not true. When I read it, I just was reading it. I was like, oh, that seems totally legit. And then when I had to go back with my critical mind through the book for this night, I was thinking about that and how it actually seems very true. I don't know why it just seemed like, oh yeah, I can really see that.
Yeah, now it does, because now she's a person.
Now she's a person, right,
exactly.
And that said, when the character Cinnamon, when she's chatting with Daisy on this park bench and they don't know anything about each other, they just happen to be, they have these strange similarities, and they're two basically lonely women. One's a really young woman, and one is Cinnamon, who's not as young. And
we're very vague.
I like that. Not as young.
I know. I'm like, not as young.
Less young.
We are all not as young. That's
we
a good way.
We are
not as young as a teenager. But
when somebody says to me, "How old are you?" I'm going to be like, "Not as young."
Not as young. Not as young as Daisy.
My new answer.
Yeah.
I was young, and now I'm not as young.
Now I'm not as young. I am much older than that now, which I think is a Bob Dylan line. So Cinnamon actually then checks herself with her own biases.
Yeah.
And so, because Cinnamon thinks, I'm exaggerating now, but basically, you're never going to be a pilot. I mean, that's not exactly the literal thing, but that's the vibe of the paragraph. And then that brings Cinnamon to, kind of muse on the microaggressions that she has had to deal with. And I think the points of the book that you deal with microaggressions. I mean, macroaggressions, of course, major too. But so many interesting microaggressions that also Jason's character I found really interesting, and so subtle and nuanced, the way Jason talks about going fishing with his boyfriends who are white. And these subtle microaggressions that his very close white friends give off. And yeah, I just would like to hear more of that because, you know, obviously you're white, so I'm assuming you're not getting those kind of microaggressions. Do you feel, Christine, like that's what you brought to the table, that you, and even with Jason, both of you, I'm sure you brought a lot to Jason's character for sure, but tell me about that process.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because Jason is Cinnamon's husband, and in our
He's
story,
everyone's least favorite character in the
He's
book.
my favorite character.
Or as my best friend described him, triggering. So
to me, making me horny.
Hey, you know what? Jason's hot.
We have all decided that Jason's
he's
hot.
definitely hot.
But I think in the scene that you're talking about in particular, and I'm going to forget the joke / microaggression we put in there, where Jason is going deep sea fishing with some of his white friends,
white dude friends.
And
gross.
you know,
Brewskis.
I think what we we're trying to do there, and it's, you know, interesting. We really try so hard with like the subtleties and the gray areas in our books, and particularly when it comes to race, which can be so obviously complicated and fraught, and interracial friendships. So Jason has these interracial friendships, and the way that comes up is there's, you know, they're going deep sea fishing, and there's a joke about Jason makes a joke about one of his friends maybe referencing the Middle Passage because they're out deep sea fishing.
Yeah, that was really funny, but dark funny.
But dark funny, and I think that's the kiss. It's like, when you can get to the point with your close friends where you can joke about certain topics, and obviously this has to be a safe space, and, you know, there's trust between you two and so forth, but, you know, we try to turn to really dive into these, you know, intimate interactions between people, because it's very different if, you know, a stranger or, you know, somebody or a coworker says something that can be a microaggression versus a close friend can say something, and you have the familiarity, it's a joke, and it could be this actually the same actual comment, right? And so much about that is the trust and the rapport that you have with somebody, and that's the kind of layers that we're, you know, digging into.
And also different kinds of microaggressions, which we wanted to dig into. I love that when you first brought up Jason, I thought you were going to talk about when he's at his construction site, he's building a restaurant, and he starts speaking in his...
the name of the restaurant.
The ruins.
The ruins, the ruins. And he puts on his like boss man voice with his workers who are from Mexico. And so Jason has these kind of aggressions towards his workers, but then there's also like slights toward Daisy, who is a bigger girl, and so there's slights about her weight, and there's slights about how big she is, and also our character Lucia, whose family is from Puerto Rico, and
who's married to a Jewish man.
who's
So we
married
really
to a
have
Jewish
a
man.
very,
Well,
you
but then
know,
also
like
about motherhood.
And about
it's
motherhood
like,
too, yeah.
So Cinnamon experiences them not necessarily as a black woman, but as a woman in her 30s without children. And people say things to her, which Christine has also heard because she is child-free by choice. You know, well, why can't you have children? Things like that. These are all microaggressions that we wanted to put in the book so that people would think about them, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it works really well. And again, because I read the two books back to back, I really, you know, I would start to almost conflate them because you touch on it with Jen and Riley from the first book. They're best of friends, but Jen will sometimes make a joke that Riley secretly feels is a bit of a microaggression, and that's also what I mean about the obfuscation of self that's you're touching on even in the first book.
Totally.
Because Riley isn't and you know, do we ever do this? And this is the question of both books, like, do we ever fully reveal ourselves? And so I think Jen and Riley do, you know, very well reveal themselves to each other, and they work through that, but there's still these little hidden things. And then the second book, the you know, between Jason and Cinnamon truly are not revealing themselves, and that, you know, comes to a head at some point. And there's this one, you know, thing that Cinnamon says where she says lion requires an exhausting vigilance, you know?
And you wrote that line. That's a great line.
Yeah, nice line. And I've definitely experienced that, you know, even in like micro lies, you know, that you might have
Baby
to
lies.
hold up to.
Yeah.
You're like, oh shit, you know, like.
Also the lie where you're like, I can't go on Friday night, right? And whatever
Exactly.
you make
You're
up,
like,
and then
oh,
you're like,
shit,
oh, I
we're at the
forgot I
same
said I had COVID.
restaurant.
Shit.
God, yeah, it really is. And so Yeah, and is it
Just me? No,
no, not just you. Yeah, and I was like, is it possible to live fully in truth? I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. But
I don't think it is.
No.
Yeah, I agree.
But I think it's something we aspire to, and I think it's an interesting theme that has, almost subconsciously really emerged in both of these books. But it really is there, which is, how we can only be have the kind of really deep, authentic relationships we want when we show up as our true selves, right? And Jen and Riley were craving that, and Cinnamon is craving that in her life, and yet how hard it is to show up as our true selves. And I think for Cinnamon's case in particular, it's there's so much shame involved when you are outside whatever the quote mainstream is, right? When you don't feel like you have a conventional family or nuclear family or, all these trappings that we say this is quote normal, and I'm using aggressive quotes, but this is normal, and everything
use
else.
Aggressive quotes. They don't go like they go like
I know.
this.
I'm like the aggressive quotes, and I don't have a boom mic to hold, but aggressive quotes. But so even though there shouldn't be the shame there, obviously, I think we all know that, and Cinnamon does, to some degree, know that too. And there's an added layer for her as a Black woman, and moving through the world where she already is heaped with all these prejudices and stereotypes, and she doesn't want to be a statistic or a trope, right? And so there's a lot of reasons for her to kind of both hide who she is, but even block off the trauma of what she experienced. And part of her emotional journey is coming to terms with that, right? And I think that that's what we want to encourage people to do, and to see our characters do it, which was, this was my past, or this is what I experienced, but this is not the limits of who I am, or this doesn't define who I am. And honestly, this is not something I had a lot of control over. And we have so much shame about things we had no control over, namely our parents, or, or where we're born, and our financial situation, that we're born into. We have no control over that. And yet there's so much shame and stigma around it.
Yeah. And I think you touched what you were just saying, you touched on this point in that, like, she says even to Jason, or thinks it, that did, she fall in love with the version of herself,
Yes.
that she
how
was,
many of us have done that?
yeah, that she was just like that Jason
We
saw
date
in
the
her.
person because they see us as we want to be seen.
And then when it kind of blows up is when, when she tries to present this very small white child to Jason as like, I'm going to raise this baby. And Jason feels very strongly that's not going to happen as a Black. And then it's a very poignant section. I was going to have you read, but maybe it's not right now. I don't know.
We can summarize.
Okay,
We can
yes.
summarize it.
Yeah, and I'm going to have you ruminate on that bit.
Yeah.
But it's a very amazing section where Jason says why he wouldn't want to go to the playground with a white baby, etc. And it's a couple of pages, great. But he can't empathize with Cinnamon, and that's that double-edged sword of self-obfuscation, because she's never revealed to him who she really is. So he's like, why would you ever want to do this?
Where is this coming from?
Yeah, we as the reader know exactly why she wants to do it. And it's this moment of spine-chilling truth where you're like, oh, if she had only revealed herself to him, now he could support her in this.
Yeah, I know. It's fascinating, too. And we wanted to show all the reasons why Cinnamon would find herself in this relationship with Jason, right? As Joe just said, it's very seductive when you see somebody who has kind of the opposite characteristics that you have in a way, and then sees you in a certain way, right?
You feel chosen.
So you feel chosen, and you feel like, I can kind of hitch my wagon to this person, and kind of go along to get along, and they're going to be my ticket or path to, XYZ life. And that is a, really seductive promise until you come up against this idea of, oh, wait a minute, there's some limitations there. Yeah. And the baby, Cinnamon finding this baby in this case.
As a Black woman who finds a white baby, just because people haven't read it yet.
Right,
yes.
Yeah.
This is that is the key part of it. This is the catalyst that forces her to re-examine this relationship.
But the pages you're talking about where Jason says, I'm a Black man and I don't want this white baby. I've had a lot of friends read this book before it came out. A a lot of white friends read this book, and they're like, oh, wow. Until I read those pages, I didn't get the consequences that were here. And he says to Cinnamon, essentially, you can take this little white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed baby to the playground, and people are just going to think you're her nanny, and that's okay. And I will be there with her, and they will think I am a crime. And that stopped a lot of my friends in their tracks. They're like, I did not see it like that. Yeah. We're like, well, that's the point of this book.
And because we really, and we don't see that very often, right? No. We're more used to seeing a white woman, a white man with a black baby.
Yeah, all the time. And so often in pop culture. And this was our intent. Yeah.
To turn it on its head. And I would even say, it's not, when Joe said it's okay, meaning it's not necessarily dangerous. Yeah. And yet, relative to what Jason would experience, if, this baby is with a nanny, I'm going to, which is not...
We're not calling the police right now.
Yeah, we're not calling the police, except that, that does happen, right? It's so rare that we see circumstances where black families or black women or black parents are raising a white child. A solar eclipse rare. But when that does happen, it is actually dangerous for both parties. Like in this case, it's probably more dangerous for Jason, but, it is, you're constantly under surveillance, and you're constantly judged and questioned, and why are you with this child, in a way that would never happen in the reverse. And that's a real, it's a very simple premise that we started with, right? What happens, let's say, if a person finds an abandoned white baby, or just an abandoned baby.
Any baby.
That's dramatic. Yeah. But once you do a skin tone switch, and that's all you're doing, like changing the skin tones of the people involved in the scenario, just a simple reverse, and it is a dramatically different set of circumstances. And how telling is that? And what does that say about our society?
And each time that comes up in each scene, like when the first time Cinnamon says, well, I found this baby, and her friend's like, oh, you have to take care of that baby. Don't bring it to the police. No way. And then Cinnamon says, it's a white baby. And oh my God, get rid of that,
The assumptions. It's really fascinating.
Yeah. Well, no, we've seen how that shift has impacted readers too. And we like to talk about this because we think it's really important. There have been comments on the book so far, and it's only been in the world for 72 hours at this point. It's crazy.
It's all a blur.
Yeah, it really is all a blur. But people saying things like, what Cinnamon did is illegal. I can't even continue the book because she shouldn't be doing this. And legality with children varies by state by state, but pretty much she's not doing anything.
But also, as Joe points out, characters are allowed to do illegal things.
Characters are also allowed to do illegal things.
There are so many books about serial killers that if everybody stopped reading after the first murder, it would really be,
Let's talk about Crime and Punishment.
Ruin a genre.
Let's talk about Dostoevsky, okay? But the code for that we would really like to throw out there is, would you think what she was doing was so illegal that you couldn't continue if it was a white woman who found a brown baby, or a white woman who even found a white baby in the park? And we really think that there is just a very
double standard.
Yeah, big double standard.
And it brings out the reader's implicit biases in a major way.
Which is what we want to do, though. That's intentional.
We don't want them to put the book down and then give us a shitty rating on Goodreads.
That's true. We do not want that.
I'd prefer that didn't happen. But still, when people, and we're trying to say this as much as possible, when people are uncomfortable, we're like, all right, ask yourself why. What is making you uncomfortable? And we believe fiction should make you uncomfortable.
No, and it is. I think it brings up two things. One, it's just the inherent implicit bias of
which
humans.
No one wants to talk about.
No one wants to talk about.
Yeah.
And I do think that now it's not that the implicit bias is better, but I think there is a more opening, even that we know this word. That we even know this word.
Totally.
We know the word microaggression. We know the word implicit bias. But there's also an issue, I think, with the modern, maybe social media brain of consumers of content, where they really confuse character with actual intention, right? So even when I dabbled on my own, which I don't do, Goodreads or whatever, it's like people are like,
oh, did you look?
I did.
Oh, fuck. Yeah. How's that?
I guess you're not supposed to, but
I did. I know I'm not supposed to. I'm 10 books in.
Really, people are crazy.
And so they're like,
nuts there. And they're basically like, oh, this these parents are crazy. I'm not reading it. I'm like, okay, well, they're actual people.
Like,
this is
it's a memoir.
This is a
And I'm
memoir.
like,
She's like, they're actually my mom and
the
dad.
book is literally
So-
about how they're crazy. So, yeah. Okay.
But you can't respond to Goodreads readers because it's
No,
like talking to the crazy
definitely.
person on the
I
street.
had
they're gonna
the
throw
urge-
like feces in your face.
I know, because I'm such a neophyte. I had the urge to be like, well, Jason, I guess you said you stopped reading it, but you clearly couldn't put it back down because you finished reading it, motherfucker.
Boom.
But then I was like, oh, yeah, I guess you're not supposed to respond, But yeah, so I think there is an issue with and I'm not even like saying this in a condescending way. I actually think our brains
No,
are
I think it's true,
mutating in a
yeah.
strange way.
100%.
Well,
Totally.
I think
Yeah.
it's a big, problem or challenge in publishing in general. And I worked in publishing, for 20
Christine
years.
has worked. You said 20. You never say
I
20. You're like,
know.
you
Wow.
usually
I
say
know.
a long time.
That's
Because
amazing.
we are
What am I saying?
You're-
I'm not as
you're
young.
not as-
yeah,
not as
I'm
young
young.
as.
I'm not as young.
Yeah.
Not as young.
Yeah.
Not as young.
It's been a few years. You're right. I think. Beep beep.
Beep, beep.
For the YouTube version, let's cut that out.
Has worked in many publishing
Has worked
houses.
in many- a long time publishing vet. That's my
Yes.
usual euphemism. But there is this idea that readers conflate. The author's morality or worldview with the characters, right?
Yeah.
And I mean, if we had, and we ran up against this in our first book too, where we wanted to be very clear that we weren't writing a morality tale, that we had a lot of, this wasn't an agenda-driven book where we were coming with a strong, viewpoint about policing in America, and then you read this like tale that just
And then a liberal
reinforced-
fairy tale where everyone is very
and
woke
then,
at the end
yeah,
of it.
and there was some happy ending with the Supreme Court being, stacked
No.
with Democrats or something.
'Cause that didn't fucking happen.
Yeah, it sure did not. So we run the types of books that we want to write, have written, and want to continue to write will always run up against that wall of sort of what is the reality that we're dealing with, particularly with hot button issues of like race, and then what is realistic for our characters, both white and black, and their experiences and how they portray those experiences. And the characters just have to get to be the characters without getting it to be a larger statement on, society with every interaction, right?
That's great.
Or our intentions with every interaction.
But I think with the rise of identity politics too, there's a lot of identity things in almost everything we do, and even in reading. It's like, I want a book to agree with everything I agree with.
And I hope you keep. I think it's wonderful
wanna
and
do
amazing
that.
that you're
That's
doing
the
what you're
thing,
doing.
yeah.
So I got the 5-minute mark, but I do want to end my
goes so
last
fast.
question. I
That
know
was
it's
so
too fast.
fast. I mean, it just-
On a really like dark and fucked up note, before we have audience
Perfect
questions.
ending. Perfect ending.
We
Yeah,
love a dark and fucked up
I
note.
want to know
Yes.
about Derek, who is the like white supremacist
The white
character,
supremacist,
and I
yeah.
guess like was he easy to sketch? Did you base him on anyone you know? Was it just like, I know this fucking dude and we'll write him? Because he actually is very particular and nuanced, and he's a real person. But yeah, that's my like that's where I want to end before we take.
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah.
That's a
Let's
white
end on,
supremacy.
guys, let's end on white supremacy and think about your questions.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
No, but I mean, I think it's interesting that you say that because it is a dovetailing with what we're talking about, where we don't want to write morality tales, and it's hard when you want to do well-rounded characters that have a lot of complexity. That is, easier when it's your main characters that you do identify with and adore. It is harder with the characters that you don't identify with. If you've all read our first book, we have a character Matt who is
He's the only character in the first book that like actually
problematic.
sucks. Yeah.
In a lot
Everyone
of
else has
ways.
like shades
It's
of
true.
like gray
Yeah.
and moments where you're like, I like you, but Matt does suck.
Yeah.
But it's hard to write a character like Derek, where we didn't want him to be a caricature. Like, you have to come to the table with even empathy for your villainous characters to some degree. Otherwise, they're just going to seem like cartoons or,
Which we see a lot of.
which we see a lot of. And so that is,
I
a
felt that
challenge
you
to
did
do.
that.
Well, he was a caricature at first.
He was a
remember?
caricature. We had to really
first
work.
draft, he really was, and even the second draft. And the gift that Christine and I have of having two of us is we can do one thing that a single author cannot do. And I've written a lot of books by myself. Christine has her first novel by herself coming out in 2 years now?
I don't
Bravo.
even know.
We don't know. What someday. And we get to read our books out loud to each other, which is really awesome because no one loves your book as much as you do. And I've tried to make Nick Astor read my books out loud with me. And he falls asleep halfway. Maybe you don't fall. You're not listening.
Which is not
I can,
a
see your lips,
testament
you're
to the
talking
book.
yourself.
It is the testament to they have
It's
10
the out
children.
loud. You don't love the out loud, but we love the out loud.
We do
And
love the out loud.
I think you recognize character a lot when you read it out loud.
Totally.
And so with Derek, I'm so glad you brought him up because that was a moment where we're like, nope.
He doesn't
nope.
sound right.
No, he doesn't
So you had to
sound
go a
right.
couple
Yeah.
rounds.
Yes.
We had to go a couple rounds.
Yes, definitely.
You know, also with people who are kind of evil in the world, they don't always appear evil.
Right,
And
exactly,
so,
yeah.
like, there are, like, he's a chameleon. He can be a lot of different things. And
When he comes into court, and so, you're like, you get it, like he's the grandpa.
he's the grandpa, yeah. But like Derek is also one thing. I was less worried about Derek and more worried about Barbara, the grandmother. I'm like, I wanted to give her the moment and
Yeah.
her the empathy. And so, yeah, but it's tough. Like caricature, especially when you're writing about race and the things that we're writing about.
It gets hard, yeah.
It gets hard, and we never want to do it.
Totally. It really seems hard. I mean, it's hard enough. Yeah, I mean, just from my experience, writing about the things I really know well about. So
Yeah.
I was really imagining you both going through that process, and the collaborative process is truly inspirational. It's amazing that you can do that. It's like, I think that's such a skill in life, and yeah, it's beautiful. I really, really am impressed and inspired by that.
Oh, well, it seems easy now, but it was so fucking
It
hard.
was
I'm
hard,
sure,
yeah.
my God,
Yeah.
it seems
Yeah.
grueling. Yeah.
I just thought, well, like an observation, I thought it was interesting. We started talking about assumptions, and I was one of many people that assumed for your first book, you wrote the different characters respectively that everyone. So I was just thinking how interesting that we started out, like assumptions has been a theme the
Totally,
entire time.
yes, yeah.
Even thinking about it critically, like, wow, getting confronted with that. I guess my question is, and I have a lot of questions, but I won't ask them because of spoilers. But like, do you each have a favorite line of the book?
Oh,
Like,
gosh.
I think some of
That's
the
a really good question.
some of the lines are so rich.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, great.
It's so hard to answer because we are
We don't remember
100
any, yeah.
pages into the new book together.
Yeah.
Like barely
Yeah.
in your, yeah.
And so, but I have to say, the one that Alex read, that Christine wrote, is one of my favorite lines. I love that. I really do.
like we did a podcast recently, a podcast interview, and the interviewer read from the opening.
Oh, yeah, let's grab that. Let's
Yeah,
grab that.
and I
do that.
really liked
Oh my God,
that
and they had
line.
like a really good podcast
Yeah, it
voice
was, like, a
too.
really
It was so
good-
Ira Glass.
Oh,
and
yeah,
they're
the
just
opening, the
like-
first
Yeah.
letter. Yeah, so good.
Yeah,
Oh,
no,
actually,
it was the
I
chapter
love,
one.
You know what,
yeah.
I love the first line of this book. Like, I'm a sucker for a good first line
Yeah.
of a book. And Christine is very good at a lot of things. But let me tell you, she has named all of our books, and she has come up with the name.
I'm good at titles and
last
first lines.
line.
Titles and first lines, but she's come up with all of them like while she's in the shower, and I just imagine her like sopping wet, running out of the shower and texting me. And
Because
she's
that's
like, "This is
happened
it.
twice.
This is it.
And the
Well,
last,
first I have to go to Amazon. I'm like, has anybody titled a book this? And then,
and the last line of the book, I'm going to do that just so you can bring, is the title of
Is
the
the
book.
title of the
yeah,
book.
And that I was
It's
really like,
nice. Yeah, it's nice when it comes.
But I like the
full
first
circle.
line, and I think that this will resonate with a lot of women of a certain age.
That are not as young as they were.
Not as
Is
young
that-
as they once
Not
were.
as young as you.
I think that's a Toby Keith line.
Yeah.
Not as young as I once was.
read it because
See,
I
we
don't
turned into
remember it.
karaoke. So the first line of chapter 1 is Cinnamon Haynes can't remember when she stopped wanting things in life. And I think we've all had, at least, if not that existential crisis, we've had that moment, right? Like, when was the last time I pushed myself, or I, thought about stepping out of my comfort zone, or I reached bigger than,
Yeah.
I thought I could. And that is something that she really wrestles with in this book.
Also, what do I
Yeah.
deserve?
Yeah, that's so true. And I can't help but answer one myself because I think when Jason, sorry, I know I'm obsessed with him.
I love how
Yeah,
obsessed
I
you are
know.
with
I love
Jason.
He
It
calls
brings me
Cinnamon-
so much joy.
When Cinnamon reveals, when it's revealed that her past is nothing, like what she told him it was, he calls her a con artist, and I think that word was woo, like that was like a
Yes.
real shiv in the side.
Right. Or it's like when,
Yeah.
a character makes reference to Daisy's decision. Daisy is the 19-year-old mother, and calls her a monster. Like, what kind of
Yes,
monster would
yes,
leave their
yes.
baby?
Their
And
child.
But those
these
words, the word
judgments,
choices.
right?
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
people have these extreme, kind of reactions to things, and have these extreme judgments that feel realistic, and our characters have them, but we also want people to interrogate why they have them and why they feel like they have the right to have them, right? Like, who
Yeah.
are you to judge anybody else's choices in this life period?
Yeah, I mean, what makes a monster and also what makes a mother? And so, yes, someone says, what kind of monster leaves a baby? Because Daisy does abandon her newborn baby. But she is a desperate child. And she's a desperate child with no other options. And desperate people make desperate decisions. And especially, we finished this book before Roe v. Wade got overturned. And we had the idea for this book in 2018 when it didn't look like that would ever happen. And I think it's more poignant now, mostly just no matter which side you're on, to think about, like, what would you do in this character's shoes? And it's not so easy as it's like, just give the baby up for adoption or just get an abortion. Daisy is 19 years old. She is broke. She has no family. She has no friends. She has no even idea how she would give a baby up for adoption or how she would get an abortion. She has no health insurance. And so she is just stuck.
You handled that really well. Yeah, that felt very believable. We didn't even dabble into the motherhood thing, but I think, did you have a question?
Somebody's going to have a question about motherhood, I know.
Does anybody have a question about motherhood?
Someone else.
In general.
We've got
had
some
their hand
mothers
up.
in the audience. We've got
How
some
do you feel
baby.
about
We've got
it?
2 babies in the audience right now.
I know.
Mine is
You
asleep.
baby.
Bon, is yours asleep? Oh, good.
2 sleeping
Well,
babies.
that is the thing. Like, that's what, you know, I think at the end, I don't think I'm giving away anything, but not at the end, just throughout the whole book, you realize that is when Cinnamon says, I'm choosing myself, you know?
Yeah, I love that line too.
Yeah,
so yeah, that is
that's
another
a good
one of our
line.
favorite lines.
Yeah,
I'm choosing
So
me.
she, you know, basically by choosing what she chooses, not to give it away and not something else, it's really for her, she realizes. And, you know, I think that that's the big, you know, meta question. Like, some of us do choose the child and you give up other things, and some of us are going to choose ourselves in a literal way. Not that, you know, it's I don't at all think it's selfish not to have children, but you're choosing your writing perhaps over each other, because you certainly, although Joe's the only person I know who writes 3 books at the same time and has 3 kids, and I think it's quite hard to write and have children at the same time.
Or to write and have no children at the same time. Also hard.
I have a truly excellent support system. Could you just stand up, Nick Astor?
Round of applause for Nick Astor.
Woo, Nick Astor!
But I mean, part of what we wanted to explore too is this ambivalence about motherhood. We see so many stories that sort of pick up after the baby is here. I mean, there's countless motherhood memoirs. There's countless stories about, you know, sort of navigating motherhood and the joys of motherhood, and the scary mommy, drunk mommy books that we had a whole slate of. You know, I mean, there's a whole genre.
Scary mommy.
Yeah,
right here.
we don't have a lot of books about the before, the inflection point, the ambivalence about having children, the you know, choices that you have to make, the complexities of those choices, where it's not as simple as, you know, it was like the perfect time to have a baby and have a partner, and you know, the baby's going to be here in spring because, you know, the cherry blossoms will be here, and et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
It's like that. I mean, we so often veer towards the idealized version, where most of the time it's like
95%
this is going to be
of
hard. I
mothers,
don't have any money. Does my partner
I'm
want
not ready
this? Are we
for
on
this. I'm not
board? My job?
prepared.
Do I have enough
Yeah.
maternity leave? Do I have enough insurance? You know, I mean, we wanted to get into those kind of complexities, which is actually the reality, and not, you know, the fantasy.
Yeah, I mean, pop culture and even literature skews towards privileged motherhood, and I think that's because a lot of authors, for the majority of human history, were privileged individuals, and you know, the people that write TV shows are also privileged individuals, and that's not the reality. And we wanted to show 2 women who chose very different paths regarding motherhood, who had no options.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, because I find it very frustrating to only see the other representation of
Or
the
they
mother.
only see one type of story, period, right? Like, in so much of pop culture, it is just like one type of story, the white savior narrative, or the happy mother narrative, or the, you know, I mean, we just keep
oh my
seeing
gosh,
the same
we
thing.
make so many mistakes and then we get engaged narrative.
Or the happy ending
happy
narrative,
ending
you know, the
narrative,
heteronormative, we're going to, you know, walk down the aisle narrative. And
Yeah.
so we're constantly just trying to push against that, both in our stories and by publishing the stories themselves, right? That these kind of stories exist that tell a different, come at it from a different angle.
And I think coming at it in terms of, and I hate to use like publishing terms, like commercial fiction instead of literary fiction. We want these books to
Accessible,
relatable stories, right?
Yeah, it really
I
feels
know
like
we
that,
talked
yeah.
a lot about trauma today, but it really is a beach read. So
Yeah, it actually really
if
is.
you want to read it on the beach, you totally can.
You'll be gently
That's what
traumatized on the beach, but then
that's
just
what
take a
these
swim.
Flowers are trying to indicate here in
It
the
looks
cover.
beautiful on your beachy picture, but you might cry a little bit.
Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You'll definitely cry a little, that's for sure. But it's good to cry on
But
the
in a
beach.
good way.
In a good way. It's good.
Oh my God, the breaking news.
Thank you everyone for following the saga of my suitcase. For those of you who don't follow me on Instagram, my husband...
Nick wants to defend himself.
My husband lost my book tour suitcase on Amtrak on Monday. I know, do you hear the collective gasp go up? So I was lucky enough that people brought clothes to all of my book tour events. I also bought some lovely jumpsuits on the road, and the suitcase has been recovered on today. Yeah, so
happy ending.
Thanks for closing that loop for us.
That's actually the main question of like our whole forget
Has
the
it been-
book. Like where's the suitcase?
Where is the suitcase? And the suitcase is
an
being
important
FedExed
question.
to us right now. Yeah.
Like you literally can't write drama like that, right?
can't,
Like
no,
it's like a
no.
mystery, drama,
it's the
love.
third-
Will their marriage survive this? we
Will
don't
our
know.
marriage survive?
It did. I can testify from just gentle observation.
We're okay. We're doing okay.
I have a question for Christine, and I was curious about this when we were talking earlier, but you're a publishing veteran, and you're a writer, and you made that jump more recently. Does that feel like a jump?
Totally.
Was that something that you were sort of hiding inside yourself? I'm very fascinated by switching hats within a world.
No, she's so surprised that it
Yeah,
happened.
I know it
never
is.
expected this.
It's a real pivot for me, and it's much more different than I thought it was going to be. Especially working in publishing for so long, and I'm like such a publishing person, and I loved being an editor, so it was never something that I was like, oh, I'm ready to escape this, or I'm going to do something different. I mean, I really loved being an editor. I loved being Joe's editor. I published a lot of great books over my 20-year career. And I liked being behind the scenes. I really did, and championing other people's stories and work. And so it is a very different orientation to be really like in front of the camera, so to speak, right? And and it's so much more like an emotionally taxing proposition to write a book. It requires a lot of vulnerability in addition to
so glad
the
you realized
discipline.
that.
And it's people, especially when we were on tour for the first book, everyone was like, what surprised you most? I'm like, it's so fucking hard. Like, and they're like, you didn't understand that? I was like, not really.
That's so interesting.
She would send me an edit and be like, hey, here's like your
I'm like, can you get this to me
all
by
the
Friday?
edits on your book. Can you just do this big thing in like 2 days?
And so now I have a lot more empathy for my writers, and I think it has made me a better editor too. I mean, I think being an editor has actually made me a better writer, just because I like doing it so much. Like I know how to structure a book. I know about pacing, momentum, like those kind of ornate things, because I've helped so many people do it. But I think the reverse is true too, in terms of like now I really understand the emotional component to it, and how hard it is to like be on stage and sell books and say, I hope you love this. I mean, that's like a really hard thing to do. And especially, we were talking about this in a podcast the other day, especially in our society today, where we say, don't worry about what other people think. Don't compare yourself to people on Instagram. Like, turn it off. Stay in your lane. It doesn't matter. The only person who matters is you. Like, all these things, which are...
Those are lies.
Dirty lies, but they're healthy messages, right? Like, you want to think that, but then when you write a book, all that matters is that people like it, right?
And you also can't...
It's hard to hold those two things.
And not stay in your lane,
notice,
because you literally have to be self-hustling.
Yes, you have to. Yeah, you have
but-
to be hustling, and that part is hard. So, I mean, I'm glad I did it, and I feel like I do. The other thing I tell people, and I'm, Joe and I talk a lot about talking about race as a hard thing to do, and the way that we push through to the other side, we feel like instructive. The other thing I tell people is I started a different career deep into midlife, you know what I mean? Like I really thought I was going to be an editor forever and ever and ever and ever. And so the pivot I made is pretty dramatic, and I'm glad I did. But I also like to say it as, you know, sort of an example of like, you can try new things, you can make a leap to do something different. And, you know, as scary as that is, I'm so glad that I did it. And so it's just like a good thing to think about, and a good thing when you see people doing it, it feels hopefully less scary. The same way like being child free by choice, when you see people that have a different, you know, like a different life, like I don't have kids, and I want, you know, young women to see that that's an option too. Like it's, you know, CFPC. I'm trying to get this acronym to take off, and it's really
CFPC.
It's not really working.
No, it's cool. I totally agree.
Because Alex, you wrote your first book. How old were you?
Yeah,
29?
I mean, exactly.
The ripe old age.
It came out last month. I got to do a conversation with Alex last month.
Yeah, last month. Yeah, because my book came out on May 2nd, and Joe was.
Were you guys sitting in different? Joe, you were sitting here, and you were sitting.
We were on the other side.
Yeah. But yeah, no, totally. And I, you know, technically had been writing the book since I was quite young, but just couldn't get it published until now. So, but yes, that said, big pivot. And, you know, I actually think, you know, there's a thing about late bloomers, and I'm like, okay, it's less time to fail before you die. You know what I mean? Like
oh my God, I love that. Less time to fail before you die.
Writing is a slow process.
No. Like, all right, we just created something right now. It's an
First
essay.
a T-shirt.
First a T-shirt, but also an essay collection called "Less Time to Fail Before You Die."
Thank you.
Yes.
And it's essays from late bloomers.
Oh my God, boom.
Yes.
That's good. Yeah.
I'll do the podcast version.
It's such
I'll edit it.
Great, perfect. And I'll write an
Alex
essay.
Will,
I'll write an essay.
Alex will write it and do the prologue and bring all the essays together.
Yeah.
Fallon, can we just like mark that down?
Get Lindsay on the phone. That's the editor.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's such a slow, arduous process, you know, as we're saying. So I just feel like, okay, I'm this age. I have, you know, maybe another book in me, and then let's call it quits.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I do want to give a shout out for Alex's book, Don't Call Me Home, because it is one
She's
of the best.
been raving about this book. I haven't had a chance to read it yet, and I'm dying to. But especially because she just keeps
honest and heartfelt memoir that was also just so fun and funny, and I like laughed my ass off. Like I actually snorted laughter a bunch while reading this.
That's my intention. Thank you.
I know. I could tell that you wanted
and
me
it's
to
hard
snort.
to be funny on the page.
It's hard to be funny, especially like with memoir and going through like things that are really shitty, but you made me laugh about really shitty things. So her book is really just a gem, and you should.
Thank you so much. That's so generous of you to have me here and mention that. So I guess we've got the wrap-up thing.
Oh, Bon, you've got a question.
Yes.
Last question is the woman with the sleeping baby.
Yeah, she couldn't really raise her hand high because they're full.
I'm just so curious if there was a moment of serious contention when it came to Christine, your lived experience as a woman of color, when trying to provide perspective for both books, and like how you resolved that.
Yeah. There were many, not just one. Yeah. I mean, it was hard. We had a really hard time, which is, again, we're honest about.
Yeah. We've got some. Should we talk about the big one? Yeah.
I mean, talk about them all. I don't know. We'll be here all night. Yeah.
Okay, How much time do we have? Do we have any wine backstage, guys?
The big one. The big one. Yeah.
So it was We're Not Like Them, which was a much harder book to write because it was the first time we were doing this together. And at the time, we keep saying this, we were relatively new friends. Christine had edited my book, but we were just starting to get to know each other. And when we say new friends, now we just kind of laugh because we're like, that was 8 years ago. Like, we are no longer new friends. But we were starting to sketch out the characters of Jen and Riley. And if you haven't read the book, it's a white woman and a black woman. They're lifelong friends. They grew up here in Philadelphia. Jen's husband is a Philadelphia police officer. Riley is a local newscaster. Hey, Nydia. And Jen's husband shoots a young black teenage boy. And Riley is the journalist who's assigned to cover it. And as we're sketching out these two characters, Riley's character started coming across as just too perfect. Like everything, she was good at everything. She was beautiful. She had this perfect, very normal, very healthy family. And my concern was that she wouldn't come across as relatable at all to readers on the page, mostly because I really enjoy writing like kind of fucked up women, like real women, right? Like we're all fucked up. We're all complicated in our own way. And so we started talking about that, and I was throwing out things that I had had happen to other characters in their lives. Did she have an affair with a married man at her last job? Did she have a teenage pregnancy? Are her parents divorced? Is there drug use in her family? All of which were tropes that I had thrown in my last novel that Christine edited, Charlotte Walsh Likes to Win, which was about a white woman, and Christine really pushed back hard on that, and I'll let her pick it up from there.
Yeah, it's just like we had a specific intention, and I very much had a mission-oriented intention that, Riley be a character that we don't see enough of in commercial fiction, which is just a regular black girl, who's like doing it all, has a nice family, middle class, that's not burdened by a lot of pathological trauma that comes, in a lot of white stories about, black people and black characters. And so, Jo saw, a little bit of equivalency between characters, right? It was a little bit like, well, why not? Because, white characters do this all the time. And it was really a, flashpoint conversation because, it's like, it's not the same, right? It's not the same. There's an extra layer and an extra burden if you say like Riley's dad's a drug addict, versus Jen's dad's a drug addict or whatever. And we were really trying to be so cognizant about pushing it back against these tropes. I mean, it was very intentional that Riley's family was the stable middle-class family that actually helped, brought Jen along, who had a much more complicated family life. And so, we had it, it got very, intense. Do we need to bring the baby on stage? We might
have to bring the baby on stage.
It got very intense, and in order to as we hashed out why this matters, this conversation even makes its way into that book because Jo's like, it's not about race, and I'm like, everything is about race, and there, that's our whole shtick really is that everything is about race, and it oozes into every interaction, every relationship when you have two people of different races or backgrounds, and so that was really important for us to show that. But it was like all those kind of little conversations, not really little, all those kind of big conversations.
They were really big
that
conversations.
We
didn't talk for weeks at a time. There were
really?
years.
Yeah.
So because there would be like a tension, like in the air, in the digital air. That's so interesting.
For sure.
For sure. And because, as Christine said, I was like, this isn't about race. She's like, of course it's about race. And then I felt like I'd done something wrong, or
that's so interesting. So
on
some level,
and then I felt shame, right? And with that shame came anxiety, and I think that also ends up shutting down a lot of conversations about race. And then because then I wasn't talking more, Christine thought I was being defensive.
Oh boy,
we try to be really
spiral.
And we try to be really honest about that when we're on stage, especially with groups that are either all black groups or all white groups or mixed groups, because we see people nodding a lot. They're like, yep, that shut down my conversation about race, or that ended my friendship about race. And we're like, okay, well, yeah, it sucked. And we got through it. And we got through it by continuing to have the conversation and by giving each other grace. And we didn't have a choice. We were married contractually at that point. We're like, okay, you've got to write this book. But we're really glad we did it.
It's so cool, that that you
pushed through.
And we're better friends because of it. And we can now have these honest conversations with people who are like, oh, okay, maybe it doesn't have to be as hard as I think it is, right?
Yeah, that's really cool. And I also feel like the one thing, I don't want to end the night without adding this in, because that subtleness is what I found the most interesting thing, going back to the first book as well, is exactly what you say, because that is very reflective of Riley and Jen as well. Because we all think, I feel like, as progressive Philadelphian,
let's be honest. I mean, we're
people at the
on the
library.
coast.
We're all on the same page. And that said, I know as a white person, I'm completely unaware of the microaggressions and macroaggressions, that my black friend is having. I'm totally in the dark about that. So I loved the way you touched on it in that more subtle way. That's not like the Derek type person.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
But then
where
it's
that's
also
such an
good
extreme.
to see if it's in the Derek type person.
Yep.
But then adding in that, I wanted to say that you also deal with feminism in this lovely way, because you never outrightly talk about it, but they are both really feminist books.
Definitely.
And Jason had to bring him at the end.
Alex's secret boyfriend.
Yes,
Jason.
at the end of the day, is a hot
misogynist
misogynist on some levels. Yeah. And
Hashtag hot
Hashtag
misogynist.
hot
Yeah.
misogynist.
and like
Well, come on, we've all loved a hot misogynist.
definitely,
Yes.
you gotta have a little misogyny in there to spice things up.
This is going to be the best podcast the Philadelphia Free
yeah.
Library has ever released, by the way.
But
There's
I
some hot
mean,
takes for sure.
you know, I'm going to bring up another book, and this is a lot to bring up in the last minute, but I mentioned that Monsters book to you.
Monsters, yeah, of course.
Yes,
Yeah.
a new book by Claire Dieter, Monsters. It's mostly about men, male artists who do, monstrous things, but it's much more than that. And anyway, she brings up, it would be an amazing co-read actually with your book, because the last part of the book is about women monsters, but the word monsters is very loose, because basically a woman monster is a artist woman who abandons her child.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Oh,
No, I hear that all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah.
Wow,
So
that's
I'm just
really-
kind of throwing that out
Throwing
there.
it out there.
But I thought of it a lot while reading your book, because
Yeah, it
obviously,
sounds like
who knows whether Daisy's not necessarily an artist, but men abandon their children all the time.
All the time.
Yeah.
Constantly. All right, Nydia Han, last question.
Number one, I was struck by the pretty character and the judgment on her parents.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I kind of felt a little sting, like, oh,
Wait, the
you're
witch
judging my
character?
parents.
Preety. Yeah.
I'm
Preety.
just wondering how
Yeah.
that whole sort of little side story evolved. And then secondly, did you talk about a third book? And can you give us a preview?
Yes.
of
Yes,
that?
all right, she snuck in 2 questions.
Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Well,
Okay. Yes, Preety Cinnamon is a college career counselor at a community college. We also wanted to give her a very normal person job, because people in books always have fancy advertising
jobs,
or
yeah.
lawyer jobs, and we're like, no one in real life has those fucking jobs. And so she's advising one of her students, Preety, who comes from a very conservative immigrant background, and her parents don't agree with her relationship with a woman or her career choices. And Cinnamon, we did that very specifically. Cinnamon is actually kind of judgy of Preeti's parents. And we wanted to show that everyone is judgy about someone. Everyone has their own biases. No one is immune from it. It's not like only white people have biases or only black people have biases. Everyone has bias against someone. And so that's why we wanted to show that. And she has extreme judgment against Preeti's parents.
But also we wanted to show the different types of parenting too, and that Preeti's parents feel like they are protecting her, right? They want you to, they want her to have a good job, and they want her, to have a conventional relationship, right? Because that is how you're successful in America, and et cetera, et cetera. And so we thought that, it's such a little tiny anecdote, but we're trying to, in each of these, pack a lot of punch in terms of all of the different dynamics of the way that you can look at something, of who's judging who and what is the background.
Caring for who, and what does care mean, and the different ways that we consider care. And yes, very quickly, we do have another book together, and it is called I Never Knew. We use too many pronouns, and it's really screwing
It's
with
another
us.
string of pronouns.
I never knew you at all. And so in interviews, we're really like, all right, so yeah, we never are not you at once. Yeah.
We really set
We
ourselves
really
up there.
screwed ourselves. If we do a 4th book, it's just going to be called Bananas.
Yeah, just one word. That's it. I like bananas. We would
Bananas.
love that, yeah.
Bananas.
We reverse engineer a plot
Go.
about race and bananas.
Yeah.
I'm sure it can be done.
Friendship and bananas.
But that book is about an interracial marriage. So it's a black woman married to a white man, and this white man was raised by his grandfather. And we learn at the beginning of the novel that the grandfather may have been participant in or implicated in a racial crime when he was a teenager some decades before. And this information comes to light through Simone's ex-boyfriend, no less, who has a podcast where he investigates these racial crimes of the past. And so it really asks questions of, sort of how far have we come? How well can you know somebody? What is forgiveness? What is the statute of limitations for forgiveness? And so on and so forth. And how this marriage can navigate or survive or not. We'll see.
We actually don't know yet.
We actually don't know
We
yet.
have no idea what's going to happen.
That's interesting. So you don't know.
We don't know.
Don't know the
yet.
ends in every book, or just this one?
We usually know the end.
We usually know the end. This
This
is
book, we
atypical,
do
yeah.
not know the end.
Great.
Yeah, because
That's
Christine
exciting.
loves
Which
an
is giving me
outline.
hives. Yeah,
She
I don't
cannot
like not
handle
knowing
it.
the
shit.
end.
She's
Yeah.
freaking
I
out.
want to know the end of everything that's happening in my life at all
Yeah,
times.
I can see
like
that
in my
about you.
real life, like.
And I'm like,
Yeah.
it's all
That's
a
interesting.
mystery.
The first day I started dating the man I'm dating now, I'm like, what do you think is going to happen here? Like, where does this end up? Like, what? I know it's only been an hour, but like, let's game
That's
this
good.
out
We good.
over the next 5
Yeah.
months, year, 10 years, and just like,
What's our plan?
What's
that
our
didn't
plan?
work out
funny.
for you.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, so then before we go, your book, your personal, one author novel
We
is
each have one author novel.
takes
now,
place in
too.
Sicily and is coming out.
I've got The Sicilian Inheritance coming in April, which is a twisty, turny murder mystery loosely based on the murder of my great-great-grandmother in Sicily. And so, yes, that will hit in April. And
2024.
I would love to see all of you at our launch party, which will definitely include a lot of Sicilian wine and
Amazing.
cannolis.
yeah.
I'll be there. And Christine, we don't know exactly.
Oh, no,
when-
we know exactly what hers is. It's about her latest romance.
Oh, okay.
It's
Great.
called To All the Men I've Loved Again, and it's about
Ooh.
second chances, first loves, the one that got away, the one that gets found. So classic kind of rom-com territory.
Yeah, I can't
Thrillers,
wait. Okay.
rom-coms.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you
It's
so
been
much for
wonderful.
being
Thank you.
such an
This was
amazing
so
conversation
good.
partner. And
Thank
thank you
you
guys
guys.
for your great questions.
Thank you,
we
Free
really
Library.
appreciate you
Thank
being
you,
here.
Philadelphia Free Library.